My name is Lawrence Holmes. I was born in 1935 and I run Veryan Bunker's Museum. I am also a member of the Royal Observer Corps Association. I was born in a relatively small Derbyshire town called Heanor, but I spent most of my early life, up to the age of about 10 or 11, in Ripley, Derbyshire, which is a mining area. And then I moved to Swanwick, and then to Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. So that was my early life. My dad was in World War II. He went abroad, came back, ultimately served in Germany. I have very few memories of World War II, in actual fact. I can remember air raids taking place and we heard German planes going overhead. In fact, our house at Ripley had an air raid shelter, and it was underground, and we used to go in it from time to time. I can always remember my dad coming home on leave one day, and I found in the bedroom a revolver, which he told me to leave alone. So, and I can remember soldiers marching along the main road in front of our house. But apart from that, I've got very few memories of World War II. I would, of course, be 10 years of age when World War II ended. I have no memory at all of nuclear weapons going off that ended World War II.
What did you actually study at school, and when did you leave school?
I attended Ripley Primary School, and then I went to Swanwick Hall Grammar School. I did the normal subjects that people did at grammar school, but I went into the arts stream, which meant that I studied art and languages, biology and things like that, which was actually quite unsuitable for me because I'm more of a technical person. But I ended up getting about 8 O-levels, I think we call them, at the time, which was quite reasonable. And then at the age of 16, I started work. My father, because he'd been in the army in World War II, was quite concerned that the Korean War was in progress, and he didn't particularly like the thought of any son of his going out to Korea to fight the communists. And all round where we lived in Mansfield, people were going into the coal mines, and that was a normal thing to do. A father, a brother, an uncle, a cousin would all go and work for the National Coal Board, and so I did the same. Because I was good at art and drawing, I love that, I became a mining surveyor. I spent 5 years going to technical college on a part-time day release. I was an apprentice mining surveyor with the National Coal Board, who at the time were well known for being very good educators of young people. I was very thankful for that, but it was still nevertheless quite hard work because I was going down a coal mine by day, very often every day, from the hours of 8 till 2 o'clock, coming up, doing some work in the office, and then going to night school at night. I did get a part-time day release, but that was quite hard, and I did that for 5 years, and ultimately gained a higher national certificate in mining surveying and became a certificated mine surveyor under the Mines and Quarries Act, which meant I could officially be the surveyor for any mine. So that's led us up to roughly when I was 21 years of age, round about the 1960s, I suppose, mid.
So how did you become involved in the Royal Observer Corps, and why did you join?
The very first job that I had after qualifying, and I would have been about 21 years of age, was that of an assistant surveyor at Blidworth Colliery in Nottinghamshire, and I simply moved there after doing a probationary period at the area headquarters in Edwinstowe. I moved to Blidworth, and the colliery surveyor was a man called Ron Lawther, lovely man, and we ultimately became very good friends. I was in the office with him at the time. There was only two of us, and I was incredibly surprised when one day I went into a drawer in the office, which should, to my mind, have contained mine plans, to find that they contained quite large silhouettes of aircraft, and there were dozens and dozens of them. I also thought it was quite strange that my boss, as it were, every time an aeroplane flew over, he would rush to the window with a pair of binoculars and try and see it and recognise it. I thought this was quite strange and bizarre, and I asked him why, and he said he was a member of the Royal Observer Corps. He explained it to me, which in those days the Observer Corps still had an aircraft reporting role, and he said, would you like to join? And I thought, well, I'm interested in aeroplanes. In fact, I was fanatical about aeroplanes, and I thought this sounds to be an organisation for me. It was part-time, spare time. I wanted a hobby, and when the boss actually asks you if you're interested, it's not a bad thing to do, and that's what I did. And I joined the Observer Corps as an observer in 1953, and on Jig 2 or Juliet 2 post, Farnsfield, which was part of 8 Group, whose headquarters were in Coventry. The only thing we'd got in 1953, and for quite a few years afterwards, was an above ground aircraft reporting post. And indeed, Farnsfield never had a nuclear bunker until about 1960-62 time. So my introduction to the Corps was very much aircraft orientated.
There was a uniform system to the Royal Observer Corps at that point, and obviously there was training as well in RAF establishments, yet it was a civilian organisation. How was it different from the military?
Well, I didn't analyse it too closely. The big difference, of course, was that almost all of the Royal Observer Corps personnel were part-time. They were volunteers, like the TA, whereas in the military, they are by and large full-time, apart from the TA. So the big difference was that we were volunteers. In fact, we were unpaid volunteers. We only got a meeting allowance, which reflected mileage, but to call it any form of pay would have been a misnomer. Having said that, we were issued with Air Force Blue uniforms. In fact, we looked like RAF personnel. Our rank structure was broadly similar to the RAF. There was an observer, there was a leading observer, who was the equivalent of a corporal, a chief observer, the equivalent of a sergeant, and then you went into the officer ranks, observer officer, observer lieutenant, and so on. So the Observer Corps, or the Royal Observer Corps, mirrored the RAF rank structure. It very much adopted the RAF system of training, which I've got to say, and I didn't know this at the time, the RAF system of training was absolutely marvellous. It was very, very well managed. It was very, very well set up. And the Observer Corps took that. The big difference, of course, was that the Observer Corps always was teaching unpaid volunteers who could at any time walk out if they didn't like how things were going. In fact, most of the instructors were spare time volunteers. In fact, the leading observer on every post was the instructor. Generally, he had no training whatsoever in methods of instruction, although later on people could go on courses for methods of instruction. But they were the big differences between the military and the Royal Observer Corps.
Was it secret? Did you have to sign the Official Secrets Act?
Yes, we did. We did have to sign the Official Secrets Act, and it became obvious almost from the onset that the Royal Observer Corps was discreet, it was low key, and we were not encouraged particularly to go around shouting, "Hey, we are members of the Royal Observer Corps." It was a very low key organisation. And yet at that time, when we were reporting aircraft, I didn't consider there was anything particularly secret about what we were doing. We were simply reporting aircraft, and that meant going out into the post, looking at the sky, looking for aircraft, plotting them and reporting those plots to the ops room, where they displayed all the information on their boards for the benefit of the defence committees and the RAF. So, I didn't consider it to be particularly secret work, but we were low key.
At the time, the planes that you were spotting, were any of them from the Soviet Union? Were they predominantly military, civilian?
We actually plotted anything that was in the sky. Don't forget that we only plotted aircraft when we had an exercise. And we only had an exercise about 6 to 7 times a year, and that would last probably all day, so 8 hours. Occasionally we'd have a weekend exercise, and we would report any aircraft that we saw. Sometimes, incredibly, the RAF used to fly aircraft specially to train the ROC in the art of aircraft recognition and reporting. It would be unheard of today to do that sort of thing, but they did that in those days. In fact, someone, when I was in Cornwall, told me a lovely story of a Sunderland literally circling Cornwall time and time again just to give observers practice in reporting a Sunderland. I personally never saw or ever reported a Russian aircraft. I don't know of anyone that reported or saw a Russian aircraft. And yet I know that the Russians did infiltrate relatively near the British coast, particularly the North Sea coast. Whether any observer who was on duty up in Northumberland or Scotland ever saw a Russian aircraft, I would doubt very much, because the British in those days had jet fighters. They would have been intercepted and they would have been escorted away from the British shores.
When you joined in 1953, what was the mood of the nation like at the time?
I suppose the mood was that we were getting over the war. We were beginning to prosper. From my perspective, bearing in mind I was only a young boy in World War II, we were simply developing into a normal family. I can remember in World War II and for some years afterwards, the fact that you couldn't buy certain things, sweets or crisps or certain drinks. People are amazed when I tell them that. I can remember that way after the war, 2 or 3 years after, a local shop had a supply of Smith's crisps, and there were queues at that small shop to buy packets of Smith's crisps because they hadn't seen them. They were the Smith's crisps with the blue little packets of salt in, and I queued with the rest of them just to get some crisps. But by 1953, when I joined the Corps, things were getting better, much better, and we were living what I would call a normal life. I think perhaps in 1953, the thought of another war was probably not even contemplated. Let's face it, it was only 8 years since World War II ended. I know the Cold War was beginning to develop, and indeed our role after the war, that's the Observer Corps' role, was that of plotting the low-level Soviet intruder. So we were well aware that there was a potential nuclear war with the Soviet Union. What's of interest is that I tell many people this, that from the moment I joined the Corps in 53 to the time that I'd left in 1995, there was only ever one enemy, and that was the Soviet Union. When there was no Soviet Union, there was no enemy. And that becomes a slight problem when you're trying to identify the dangers that might affect the UK.
By the 1950s, so 1955, the government at that point produces the Strath Report, which looks at the very real danger of nuclear conflict and also the effects on the United Kingdom. As your career developed within Royal Observer Corps, by that point of the latter part of the 1950s, were you ever worried about the Cold War going hot?
The truth is no. In fact, in 1955, the Corps was asked by the Home Office to take on the nuclear role. And there's no question about it that had we not done that, the requirement for the aircraft role would have diminished, and probably by the 1960s, the Corps would have been stood down completely. So getting the nuclear role from the Home Office actually saved the Corps, and it gave it another 30 years of life. I was not aware of particular tensions, although we obviously knew that the Cold War was developing, I'll call it. And we could understand why the Home Office wanted a field force for the United Kingdom Warning and Monitoring Organisation to gather all the data that was required to produce nuclear plots, give warnings of nuclear attacks and the approach of radioactive fallout. But I suppose the date which sticks in my mind, where it was brought home, was in 1962, which was the Cuban crisis. And by then we'd started to train in nuclear reporting.